Good morning. Good Sunday morning, May the 25th, 2025. I hope everyone is doing well, and I hope everyone is ready to be in God's house with God's people, worshiping our great God in spirit and in truth. And just excited to be finishing up the book of Esther this morning. Really love the book, and so we'll be continuing in that reading of Esther, chapters 6 through 10, as we continue in the reading from the Everyday Gospel by Paul David Tripp. So let's get into it. Join me as we read God's Word together on this Sunday morning. Esther chapter 6. During that night, sleep had fled from the king, so he said for them to bring the book of memoranda, the chronicles, and they were read before the king. And was found written what Mordecai had told concerning Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs from those who were doorkeepers, that they had sought to send forth their hand against King Ahasuerus. And the king said, "What honor or greatness has been done to Mordecai for this?" Then the king's young men who attended him said, "Nothing has been done for him." So the king said, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman had entered the outer court of the king's house, in order to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows which he had set up for him. The king's young men said to him, "Behold, Haman is standing in the court." And the king said, "Let him come in." So Haman came in, and the king said to him, "What is to be done for the man whom the king delights to honor?" And Haman said in his heart, "Whom would the king delight to honor more than me?" Then Haman said to the king, "For the man whom the king delights to honor, let them bring a royal robe, which the king clothes himself in, and the horse on which the king is ridden, and on whose head a royal crown has been placed. And let the robe and the horse be given over to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, and let them clothe the man whom the king delights to honor, and lead him on horseback through the city square, and call out before him, 'Thus it shall be done to the man whom the king delights to honor.'" Then the king said to Haman, "Take quickly the robes and the horse as you have said, and do so for Mordecai the Jew, who is sitting at the king's gate. Do not fall short in anything of all that you have spoken." So Haman took the robe and the horse, and clothed Mordecai, and led him on horseback through the city square, and called out before him, "Thus it shall be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." Then Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman hastened home mourning, with his head covered. And Haman recounted to Zeresh his wife and all his friends everything that had happened to him. Then his wise men and Zeresh his wife said to him, "If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the seed of the Jews, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him." While they were still speaking with him, the king's eunuchs reached Haman's home, and hastily brought Haman to the feast which Esther had prepared. Now to chapter 7. Then the king and Haman came to drink wine with Esther the queen. And the king said to Esther on the second day also, as they drank the wine at the feast, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be given you. And what is your request? Even to half of the kingdom it shall be done." Then Queen Esther answered and said, "If I have found favor in your eyes, O king, and if it seem good to the king, let my life be given to me as my petition, and my people as my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be caused to perish. Now, if we had only been sold as slaves, men and women, I would have remained silent, for the adversity would not be worth the annoyance to the king." Then King Ahasuerus said to Esther the queen, "Who is the one, and where is the one who fills his heart to do thus?" So Esther said, "An adversary and an enemy is this evil Haman." Then Haman became terrified before the king and queen. The king arose in his wrath from drinking wine, and went into the garden of his palace. But Haman stayed to seek for his life from Queen Esther, for he saw that calamity had been determined against him by the king. Now the king returned from the garden of his palace into the place where they were drinking wine, and Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. So the king said, "Will he even assault the queen with me in the house?" As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs who were before the king said, Behold, indeed, the gallows which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on behalf of the king, are standing at Haman's house 50 cubits high. And the king said, Hang him on it. So they hanged Haman on the gallows which he had set up for Mordecai, and the king's wrath subsided. Now to chapter 8. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave the house of Haman, the adversary of the Jews, to Queen Esther, and Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was to her. The king removed his signet ring, which he had taken away from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Then Esther spoke again to the king, fell at his feet, wept, and implored him to repeal the evil scheme of Haman the Agagite, and his scheme which he had devised against the Jews. And the king extended the golden scepter to Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king. Then she said, If it seems good to the king, and if I have found favor before him, and the matter seems proper to the king, and I am good in his eyes, let it be written to turn back the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to cause the Jews, who are in all the king's provinces, to perish. For how can I endure to see the calamity which will befall my people? And how can I endure to see the perishing of my kinsmen? So King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, Behold, I have given the house of Haman to Esther, and him they have hanged on the gallows, because he had sent forth his hand against the Jews. Now you write to the Jews according to what is good in your eyes in the king's name, and seal it with the king's signet ring, for a written decree which is written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's signet ring may not be turned back. So the king's scribes were called at the time in the 3rd month, that is the month Sivan, on the 23rd day, and it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded to the Jews, the satraps, the governors, and the princes of the provinces which extended from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, to every province according to its script, and to every people according to their tongue, as well as to the Jews according to their script and their tongue. And he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus, and sealed it with the king's signet ring, and sent letters by the hands of couriers on horses, riding on steeds, sired by the royal stud. In them the king gave the Jews who were in each and every city the right to assemble and to make a stand for their lives, to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish the entire military force of any people or province which would act as their adversaries, including little ones and women, and to plunder their spoil. On one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, the 13th day of the 12th month, that is the month Adar, a copy of that which was written down to be given as law in each and every province was revealed to all the peoples, so that the Jews would be ready for this day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers, hurried and hastened by the king's word, went out, riding on the royal steeds. The law was given out at the citadel in Susa. Then Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal robes of blue and fine white, with a large crown of gold and a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Susa cried aloud and was glad. For the Jews there was light and gladness and joy and honor. In each and every province and in each and every city, wherever the king's word and his law reached, there was gladness and joy for the Jews, a feast and a holiday. And many among the peoples of the land became Jews, for the dread of the Jews had fallen on them. Now to chapter 9. Now in the 12th month, that is the month Adar, on the 13th day, when the king's word and law had reached the point for them to be done, on the day when the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain power over them, it was turned around so that the Jews themselves gained power over those who hated them. The Jews assembled in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus to send forth their hand against those who sought their calamity. And no one could stand before them, for the dread of them had fallen on all the peoples, even all the princes of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and those who were doing the king's work advanced the Jews, because the dread of Mordecai had fallen on them. Indeed, Mordecai was great in the king's house, and the report about him went throughout all the provinces, for the man Mordecai became greater and greater. Thus the Jews struck all their enemies with the sword, killing and causing them to perish, and they did what they pleased to those who hated them. And at the citadel in Susa, the Jews killed and caused to perish 500 men. And Parshandatha, Dalphon, Aspatha, Poratha, Adalia, Aradatha, Parmashata, Arissa, Aradai, and Basa, the sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Jews' adversaries, but they did not send forth their hand for the plunder. On that day, the number of those who were killed at the citadel in Susa, on that day, the number of those who were killed at the citadel in Susa came to the king. So the king said to Queen Esther, the Jews have killed and caused to perish 500 men and the 10 sons of Haman at the citadel in Susa. Now in the rest of the king's provinces, what have they done? So what is your petition? It shall be given to you. And what is your further request? It shall also be done. Then Esther said, if it is good to the king, let tomorrow also be given to the Jews who are in Susa to do according to the law for today, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows. So the king said that it should be done so, and the law was given in Susa, and Haman's 10 sons were hanged. And the Jews who were in Susa assembled also on the 14th day of the month Adar and killed 300 men in Susa, but they did not send forth their hand for the plunder. Now the rest of the Jews who were in the king's provinces assembled to make a stand for their lives and obtain rest for themselves from their enemies, and to kill 75,000 of those who hated them, but they did not send forth their hand for the plunder. This was done on the 13th day of the month Adar. On the 14th day they rested and made it a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews who were in Susa assembled on the 13th and 14th of the same month, and they rested on the 15th day and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore, the Jews of the rural areas who live in the rural towns make the 14th day of the month Adar a holiday for gladness and feasting and sending portions of food to one another. Then Mordecai wrote down these events, and he sent letters to the Jews who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far, to establish among them to celebrate the 14th day of the month Adar and on the 15th day of the same month annually. Because of those days, the Jews obtained rest for themselves from their enemies, and it was a month which was turned around for them from sorrow into gladness and from mourning into a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and gladness and sending portions of food to one another and gifts to the poor. Thus the Jews fully accepted what they had started to do and what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the adversary of all the Jews, had devised against the Jews to cause them to perish, and had cast pur, that is, a lot, to throw them into confusion and cause them to perish. But when it came before the king, he said by letter that his evil scheme which he had devised against the Jews should return on his own head, and that he and his son should be hanged on the gallows. Therefore they called these days Purim, after the name Pur, therefore because of the words in this letter, both what they had seen in this regard and what had reached them. The Jews established and accepted a custom for themselves and for their seed and for all those who joined themselves to them, so that celebrating these 2 days, according to what was written down and according to their fixed time from year to year, would not pass away. So these days were remembered and celebrated throughout every generation, every family, every province, and every city. Thus these days of Purim were not to pass away from among the Jews, nor their memory come to an end from their seed. Then Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, with Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to establish a second letter about Purim. And he sent letters to all the Jews, to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, namely words of peace and truth, to establish these days of Purim at their appointed times, just as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had established for them, and just as they had established for themselves, and for their seed, with words concerning their times of fasting and their crying out. And the declaration of Esther established these words concerning Purim, and it was written in the book. Now to chapter 10. Then King Ahasuerus set forced labor upon the land and the coastlands of the sea, and the entire work of his authority and his might, and the full account of the greatness of Mordecai, whom the king had made so great, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was second only to King Ahasuerus, and was great among the Jews, and pleasing to his many fellow brothers, one who sought the good of his people, and the one who spoke for peace of all his seed. And that's going to conclude our reading from the biblical text as we close out the book of Esther. Now, our devotional reading. The Bible never presents the sovereignty of God in a way that erases human responsibility. If someone told you, I am just trusting God to reconcile my broken relationship with my brother, how would you respond? The person's statement reveals flawed and unbiblical thinking. God's absolute sovereignty over everything and everyone all of the time never excuses me from doing the things He has called me to do. If I am in an unreconciled relationship with my brother, I am to go to Him with the hope of reconciliation. The Bible presents the truth of the interrelationship between the sovereignty of God and His people's responsibility. God often exercises His sovereign will through the means of the true validity of the choices and actions of secondary agents, people. Our actions and choices are means by which God works out His sovereignty. He is in control not only of the final end of things, but also of the means to the end. This means that our choices and actions matter. God's absolute rule in every situation and location never lets us off the hook. He is sovereign and we are responsible. These truths work in cooperation and never in opposition. The crucial importance of human responsibility is the second great theme of the book of Esther. In the last devotional I wrote that Esther presents to us a God who works not only in the light but also in the shadows. He also works to ensure that what He has ordained for His glory and the good of His people will come to pass. He is never distant or uninvolved. He never takes a vacation or sleeps on the job. The hope of the universe rests in the fact that God's rule is universal and unstoppable. But Esther presents us with another theme. The way God often works His will, assuring that what He has ordained actually comes to fruition, is through the choices and actions of real people who have actual power to choose, decide, and act. This is illustrated clearly and powerfully in the faith, courage, and actions of Mordecai and Esther. Through their brave and wise choices, God's plan to preserve His people so that out of them would come the Savior of the world continues undeterred. God's people are preserved and God's plan marches on. This is exactly what God has ordained. But everything comes to pass because of the crucial decisions and actions of Mordecai and Esther. So today, you can rest in the fact that God's will be done. His perfect plan will march on to completion. But you must also understand that resting in His rule is not an excuse to be passive or inactive. The one who rules everything calls you to believe, obey, fight, proclaim, repent, love, and follow His works. He works His rule through your work, so rest and work. This is the lifestyle of the redeemed. Let's read it. Isaiah 64, verses 1 through 5. Oh, that you would rend the heavens and come down, that the mountains might quake at your presence, as fire kindles the brushwood, as fire causes water to boil, to make your name known to your adversaries, that the nations may tremble at your presence. When you did awesome things for which we did not hope, you came down, the mountains quaked at your presence. For from the ancient times they have not heard or given ear, nor has the eye seen a God besides you, who acts in the behalf of the one who waits for Him. You meet Him who rejoices and does righteousness, who remembers you and your ways. Behold, you are angry. Indeed, we have sinned. We continued in them for a long time. And shall we be saved? And that's going to conclude our reading.